And reports that have surfaced from across the country over the past few days are disturbing, and they bring to light the systemic realities facing far too many Canadians. Later today, I'll be speaking with Cabinet and to the RCMP Commissioner. We need to ensure that each of these individual cases is investigated properly, but we also need a larger reflection on changing the systems that do not do right by too many Indigenous people and racialized Canadians. We can't solve all of this overnight, but we need to make a change. We need to start today. No matter who you are, COVID-19 will have had an impact on you in one way or another, because everyone has been affected by this pandemic. And as we mark National Accessibility Week, we're reminded that some people have been hit especially hard. Whether it's buying PPE or covering the cost of support workers, many Canadians with disabilities are facing unexpected bills that can be hard to pay. To help cover these costs, today I can announce that we are introducing a one-time non-taxable payment of up to $600 for Canadians with disabilities. And we're not stopping there. We're also establishing a national workplace accessibility stream to help people with disabilities find and keep a good job. And we're funding 5 new projects across the country that will help people get supportive devices to overcome barriers in the workplace. I know that Minister Qualtrough will have more to say about all of this later today.
Today, I am announcing a one-time, non-taxable payment of up to $600 that will be paid to Canadians with disabilities to help them pay their unexpected expenses during the crisis. We are also creating the National Workplace Accessibility Stream to help people to find and keep a good job. And we are investing in 5 new projects right across the country that will help people with disabilities to overcome barriers in the workplace.
Earlier today, we received the job report for May. The numbers show that more Canadians returned to work last month, but that many people continue to face a really tough time. That tells us that we are moving forward, but we need to stay focused on getting people back on the job. That's why we extended the wage subsidy through the coming months and have approved over 300,000 applications to support millions of jobs. There's still a long way to go, but we're starting to see some progress. Roughly 1.2 million Canadians who were accessing the Canada Emergency Response Benefit no longer need this help. This is encouraging news, but we're nowhere near done. As I've said before, to really move forward, we need a Canada-wide plan on safely and effectively restarting the economy. Having the right approach and the right resources to back it up will determine where we are, not just in the coming weeks, but into the fall and winter. Canadians have sacrificed too much over the past couple of months to lose the progress we've made. As we restart, we must do so safely, with all the right precautions in place. We know that the provinces and territories are under a lot of pressure right now and are facing real financial challenges because of this pandemic, and we want to help as much as possible. We must move quickly and carefully to get this done, to support the services Canadians rely on, and to get our communities back up and running. That's why our government has already taken action across the board on this restart. And now we're making a substantial offer to keep supporting this work. Yesterday, at our 12th First Ministers meeting since this crisis began, I brought our government's commitment to the table. The federal government is ready to contribute $14 billion more for the things that all Canadians need. As you go back to work, we want to make sure you are protected wherever you are. Here's what the Premiers and I will work on for a safe restart agreement, which would cover the next critical 6 to 8 months. We're talking about more personal protective equipment for healthcare workers on the front lines so they can focus on saving lives instead of worrying about their safety. We're talking about making sure businesses have the PPE they need so that every Canadian is safe on the job no matter where in the country they go back to work. We're talking about childcare, so that every parent knows there's a safe place for their kids. Because when mums and dads get back to work, they shouldn't have to worry about how their kids are doing. We all know that there are too many seniors who've gotten sick from COVID-19. And along with our elders, there are many people who are especially at risk if they get the virus. So we want to provide immediate assistance so that the most vulnerable are protected. We're also talking about sick pay of up to 10 days for workers who currently don't have benefits. The federal government would provide the funds needed to make this happen. And we're talking about support for cities and municipalities so that when Canadians get back to work, they can count on the services they need, like public transit and community programs. I'm looking forward to working with the premiers to make this happen. Provinces and territories are facing different realities, so flexibility will be important. But here's the bottom line. For seniors and people who need extra support, for kids and for workers, this plan is for you. With this Safe Restart Agreement, we're proposing a standard of support to keep every Canadian right across the country safe and healthy as we get our country back on their feet. On a besoin d'un plan.
We need a plan for all of Canada to restart the economy safely and efficiently. Because by developing the right plan and having the right resources, we will be able to determine not only where we'll be this summer, but also this fall and this winter. Our government has already taken steps to that end, and now we are offering to do even more to support that work. Yesterday, at our 12th First Ministers' meeting since the beginning of the crisis, I made a proposal to my colleagues. The federal government is prepared to provide $14 billion to restart the country safely and carefully. This is money that will be used to buy personal protective equipment for workers, including those working in the healthcare field. It will be money to pay for childcare, to provide more funding to municipalities, to pay for sick leave, and to support the most vulnerable, such as seniors who are living in long-term care facilities. Of course, the situation is different from one province to the other, and our plan will reflect that. But this is the important part. We are here to ensure the health and safety of all Canadians right across this country as we restart our economy. At this time, our greatest priority is to help people get through the crisis. We are also thinking of what could happen not only in the coming months, but in the coming years and decades. The Global Environment Day reminds us that we cannot build a better future if we don't have a plan to fight climate change. Our government has taken ambitious commitments in that area, and today we are following up on that. We are announcing 60 new initiatives on nature conservation across the country. Half of those projects will be led by Aboriginal people, and the idea is not only to protect our environment, but to support local economies and create good jobs for Canadians.
We are living in unprecedented times, but this is not the first moment that Canadians have been called to work together. This weekend, as we mark the anniversary of D-Day, we remember all those who fought and died defending the values that we hold dear. Like the brave men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces today, our veterans served with courage and selflessness, and they served together. Just as we stand here this morning because of their sacrifice, Canadian troops stood on Juno Beach because of those who came before them, because of the Allied forces who had, this same week 4 years earlier, completed the rescue of over 300,000 soldiers trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk. It was a remarkable operation, and not just because of the number of lives that were saved, but because of the number of people who helped save them. Hundreds of everyday men and women gave their boats to rescue their fellow citizens. They would have never succeeded alone, but together they changed the course of history. And 80 years later, as we face our own fight, their stories stand as a reminder to us all. Right now, we each have a role to play. As a business owner, using the wage subsidy to keep your employees on the payroll. As a young person, helping your community through a Canada Summer Jobs placement. Or even just by staying home when you can and following physical distancing when you're out. No matter what you're doing to help, thank you. If we keep working together, if we keep supporting each other, we will get through this. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions avec le téléphone aujourd'hui. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur
Good
Trudeau.
morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to know how much money the Liberal government will receive or has received in the form of the wage subsidy. I do not have those details. The wage subsidy was introduced originally to help businesses and other organizations, including nonprofit organizations, in order to help them keep their employees, translators, receptionists, and so forth, and people who are working right across the country in various organizations and need to bring home a paycheck in order to feed their family and pay for their groceries. These organizations are receiving that money to help workers. Follow up, Hélène? I understand that you may not have those details, but I would like to know whether you would commit to make those numbers public. The NDP has made that commitment. The Green Party has already told us how much money it would receive, and we know that if it's not voluntarily that the party reveals it, it will simply be rounded up in other expenses in a report. So as the leader of the party, will you instruct your party to reveal how much money you'll be receiving? Yes, absolutely. And in fact, the measures we have taken in relation to the wage subsidy were brought in with full transparency, and all businesses that use the wage subsidy across the country will be transparent as well. But yes, I will ensure that the Liberal Party does share that information.
Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Mia Rabson, The Canadian Press. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Yesterday, you seemed a little reticent to comment directly on some of specifically on the incident in Nunavut with the RCMP. You say this morning that you're disturbed by what you've seen. But what do you say to Indigenous Canadians who, when the police show up, feel fear and not safety?
I think far too many Canadians feel fear and anxiety at the sight of law enforcement officers and authorities of various ways, because we have continue to have systemic racism in this country, systemic discrimination. That means that Indigenous Canadians, racialized Canadians, are vulnerable in these situations. This is not something that is new for racialized Canadians or Indigenous Canadians. This has long been their reality, but over the past weeks, we've seen a large number of Canadians suddenly awaken to the fact that the discrimination that is a lived reality for far too many of our fellow citizens is something that needs to end, and that is what we are working on. Okay. Nous savons que pour beaucoup trop de Canadiens,
we know that for far too many Canadians who are Indigenous or racialized, their reality when they interact with the authorities may be very different from that of the rest of Canada. They are, we know about the existence of systemic racism and discrimination in our systems, and that has to change. Minority Canadians experience that racism all the time, and I would say that the majority of Canadians probably did not suspect how serious the problem was. So this week, we are realizing that we need to take severe measures to address that problem.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what specifically are you planning to work on when it comes to dealing with the fear that some people feel when the police show up? Saying that it's not okay is one thing, but what specifically is your government going to be putting on the table to try and stop this?
There have been many reports, many recommendations, including the calls to justice from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls inquiry that have laid out concrete steps that can be taken, and we will be moving forward on those. I will be discussing those and other measures with Cabinet this afternoon. I will also be talking with the Commissioner of the RCMP. I will remind people, however, that the federal government does have authority over the RCMP, but we need to work with provinces and indeed municipalities to cover all police forces and justice systems across this country. And these are the kinds of things that we need to do as a country across all orders of government in the coming days. Okay. Évidemment, nous allons avoir des conversations en tant que cabinet.
As a cabinet and a government, we will be talking about what we can do directly, particularly with respect to the RCMP. But of course, the different levels of government also have authority over various police forces in the country, and we must work together to deal with those issues and make progress, not just gradual progress, as we've been seeing for quite some time now, but some real concrete progress for millions of Canadians who are experiencing discrimination on a daily basis.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back to the $14 billion that you have offered to the provinces. So this is an offer. How was it received? And would these be targeted transfers? Would the money have to be spent based on federal criteria? Can you give us an idea of what that would be? Yes, they would be targeted transfers. We know that right across the country, Canadians must have the same tools and must have the same confidence about a potential second wave in order to reopen the economy. And we have a very clear idea and have shared that with respect to the essential conditions for that safe reopening. So this money will be there to ensure that all Canadians, whatever their jurisdiction or whatever region they live in the country, will have whatever they need so that we can reopen the country.
Yes, these are measures and these are funds that will be targeted towards very specific standards that need to be met for Canadians right across the country. We know that reopening the economy is going to require to have certain things in place for it to be safe, for Canadians to have confidence. And the federal government wants to make sure that right across the country, every single Canadian has what they need to be able to restart safely. And we look forward to working with the provinces to make that happen.
En suivi, Mélanie?
Follow-up, Mélanie?
Yes,
Yes, thank you. Mr. Trudeau, I'd just like to know how your counterparts reacted to your offer. But with respect to the CERB, it's almost the end for the first wave of people benefiting from this. Now, in order to be able for these people to be able to prepare for the future, have you decided to extend it, or will you be ending the program? Well, first of all, the conversation with the provinces was positive last evening, but of course there are a lot of details that will have to be discussed in the coming days, but we do hope to be able to get that money out to them soon so that they can help Canadians across the country, so that Canadians will feel confident about a safe reopening of the economy. With respect to the CERB, we know that there is a deadline coming up, and that's why we're working as a government to look at the next steps. And we will be advising Canadians and the media as to what we expect to do when we have made that decision in the coming days.
Thank you, operator. Next question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Dylan Robertson, Winnipeg Free Press. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister said he'll be asking your cabinet to change its tone on Indigenous people holding spiritual ceremonies that violate provincial public health orders. The Premier said he wants clarity from you. I'm wondering if you buy his argument that your minister is encouraging a different standard based on race and creed.
As a federal government, we've been very clear that local authorities need to work with public health officers to ensure that their citizens are safe, whether they be municipal authorities or Indigenous governance, Indigenous leadership. We need to make sure that we're doing everything in line with public health in order to keep our communities safe. Obviously, the situations will vary across the country in terms of what is needed to do, but working with local public health authorities is essential to keep all Canadians safe.
I think we all expect local authorities and local leaders, whether they're Indigenous or municipal, to work with healthcare experts to ensure that we are introducing the right measures to protect citizens. Of course, situations will vary from one region to the other of the country, and depending on their COVID-19 situation, but we are asking all community leaders to work with public health authorities to ensure that the right decisions are made to protect their citizens.
And further to Mia's question regarding police and Indigenous people, I'm wondering what concrete actions are on the table, such as paying for body cameras as part of the RCMP contract police agreements, or outside of your jurisdiction if you're considering implementing a national standard that would apply to city police forces.
We are looking at a range of options. As we know, there has been gradual progress over the years, but it hasn't been enough. And today and in the coming days, we will continue to look at ways of moving forward significantly to ensure that we reduce systemic discrimination in this country and that all Canadians, Indigenous and racialized Canadians and others, feel safe in this country, in their country.
En français.
Of course, we will be working in the coming days on measures that could be brought in to ensure that we are reducing systemic discrimination in our system and ensure also that racialized and Indigenous Canadians feel safe at home. There's work to be done, but we have made progress over the years. But it was gradual progress, and now we need clear steps and new measures to be taken. Radio-Canada, there are hundreds of Canadians who are currently stuck in Morocco and cannot leave. There are others who are stuck elsewhere in the world who would have liked to be able to leave on the first flights, but they were not able to do that. And now they're wondering, what will the federal government do? What is it doing? They feel abandoned. Some of them have medical conditions, and they can't go just anywhere to try and get back here. What do you say to those Canadians who are currently stranded somewhere else and want to come back to the country? We organized hundreds of repatriation flights and brought back thousands of Canadians from various parts of the globe. Our government worked with many other countries and many airlines in order to help a large number of Canadians to return. We also know that there are people who are still stranded abroad, and that's why we brought in measures to provide loans to them, and we will continue to work to try and help them as much as possible. But we're all in very difficult circumstances now with COVID-19.
Since the beginning of this pandemic, engaged in hundreds of flights to repatriate tens of thousands of Canadians from around the world. We know there is more to do. There are more Canadians who need to come home. It is extremely difficult as a situation, which is why we've ensured that there are loans available to Canadians stuck overseas to help them out through this difficult time. We will continue working with them as best we can to help them out.
Sur Bombardier, 2
Now,
500
on Bombardier, 2,500 jobs will be abolished between now and the end of the year, primarily in Quebec, but elsewhere in Canada as well. What do you say to the people in charge of Bombardier who are not using the wage subsidy in the midst of this pandemic? Can you help these employees, and can you help the aeronautics sector that will be in trouble not only this year but in the coming years? We introduced measures to help workers in every sector of the economy, and we will be working with companies to ensure that they can have the opportunity to help their own workers. We know that the aerospace industry, and in particularly the airlines, are facing a particularly bad crisis because of the decline in travel these days. Private jets have fewer buyers these days, so we know that it's a problem, and that that a number of these companies are in trouble, and we will try and do what we can to help the employees.
We will continue to work with industries across this country who are affected by this pandemic. Obviously, aerospace industry, airlines are particularly affected with the ceasing of global travel and with the fact that the demand for purchasing business jets has decreased dramatically. We will continue to put forward measures to support workers across this country as we have, and we will work with industries and individual companies to try and ensure that they have access to all the supports that we've put forward. But obviously this is a difficult time for many workers across the country, and we will continue to look for ways to help them.
Hi, Prime Minister. Tom Perry, CBC. You said in your opening remarks, we need to change the systems that do not do right by too many racialized and Indigenous people. You've also been talking about systemic racism a lot lately. So I'm wondering, broadly, what do you think needs to change in policing? And specifically, do you think that racism in police ranks is part of the problem?
I think, as with so many systemic challenges, there are multiple factors that come into this, and we need to work together as a country, but we need to engage and listen to racialized communities, Indigenous peoples, as we have been through the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, as we have through the Path to Reconciliation. We need to continue to engage, to look at concrete measures. We've made gradual progress over the past years, but gradual progress, incremental progress just isn't enough. We need to make stronger and bigger changes, and that's exactly what we're going to work on.
But is racism within police, within the policing system, is that part of the problem being faced by Indigenous people, racialized people?
I think when we look at systemic racism, there are, of course, individual challenges. And on the individual situations that we've seen over the past number of weeks highlighted, obviously there need to be careful and full investigations into those situations. But we also need to take a step back and look at the scope of the system and address the challenges that exist within there. Okay.
I know that when we talk about a systemic problem, yes, there are individual elements of that, but it's also the system that has to change. And the examples that we have seen recently, say in the last 10 days, make it clear that there has to be investigations conducted on those individual situations so we know exactly what happened, but we also need to reflect on the system as a whole and address these problems and transform the system so that racialized and Indigenous Canadians are better protected.
I asked your office this earlier this week and they weren't able to answer, so I hope you can. You have spoken many times about the need for more and better disaggregated data in Canada, and yet when you were setting your government's priorities last year, you did not make universal, widespread disaggregated data collection a mandate for Minister Baines. You only mandated him to do it for the census, which is only every 5 years. So why was that?
We recognize that there have long been challenges in Canada about collecting disaggregated data. It's indeed a challenge around the world, which is why a number of years ago we invested millions of dollars towards Statistics Canada to start improving our ability to collect race-based data, disaggregated data. We know there's a lot more work to do, and that's exactly what we're working on. Okay. Nous avons reconnu depuis plusieurs années.
A number of years ago, we realized that we need to have better data, including geographic data, and that's why we did invest additional funds in Statistics Canada so that we can do better in that regard. But there's still a lot of work to be done, and we will do that.
We know that COVID-19's economic crisis disproportionately affects women, but we don't know what its effect is economically on racial minorities because the data is not collected. Why should people take you seriously that it's a priority for you now if you did not set it as a priority across the board when you were making your government's priorities?
As I said, for a number of years, we have made significant investments towards greater collection of disaggregated data. We have made progress on that, but there is much more to do, and not just at the federal level, across the provinces as well. Through the first early days of COVID-19, we collected numbers of cases without even having age or in some cases gender data on who was being affected. So we know we need to do much better to properly understand where things are hitting hardest in this COVID-19 crisis. At the same time, however, we haven't waited till we get data to address the challenges posed by certain vulnerable populations. We've flowed greater funding to community organizations and grassroots organizations that are helping out people who we already know to be more vulnerable and marginalized, and we will continue to do that. But yes, we need to do a much better job around disaggregated data, and that's something we're going to do.
Right from the start, we realized that the data collected on COVID-19 cases lacked a lot of detail. We didn't have the age of many of the infected Canadians. So we knew that we had to do more. But at the same time, we also knew that the most vulnerable communities would be disproportionately hit and affected, and that's why we invested money in community organizations that aid the most vulnerable Canadians so that we are there to help. But we must do more.
Kevin Gallagher with CTV National News. Prime Minister, there's a march happening today in Ottawa to protest racism. Can you tell us if you'll be joining that march and what type of message you think you'd like to send to those protesters? And if you're not going, can you tell us why you won't be joining the march?
Canadians right across the country are joining together and standing up to speak out clearly about the systemic discrimination that has existed for far too long in our country. We have thousands of people stepping forward to highlight the challenges and to show that they want to be allies. And I salute the work they're doing. I highlight that our government will be a partner, and I look forward to continuing to see thousands of Canadians protesting peacefully right across the country. Okay.
I know that there are a great many Canadians across the country who are peacefully demonstrating to express their concern about systemic discrimination and anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism. And we must work together as a country to improve things, and I am happy to see people peacefully demonstrating for change.
But I want to ask you as well, major telecom companies in Canada have decided against using Huawei. Canada's Five Eyes allies have ruled against using Huawei. It's been 2 years. What's taking so long for you to decide about using Huawei in Canada?
We continue to work with our intelligence agencies and our security services to take the right decision for Canadians as we move forward and ensure that we remain competitive while keeping Canadians safe and keeping their businesses safe. Nous allons continuer de travailler
We
avec
will continue to work our intelligence agencies and security agencies to ensure that we're making the right decisions to protect Canadians and Canadian businesses while also ensuring proper competitiveness for our country.
Merci tout le monde.
That is the Prime Minister of Canada.